So we're pleased to have Dale Dewing this week to present. Dale leads the CCE efforts in the New York City Watershed Ag Program, helping to coordinate multi-agency efforts to protect the unfiltered
Janice,
drinking
I'm
water
not hearing
source.
you.
Oh, not at all?
I can hear you, Janice, but I don't know.
I can hear you.
Huh,
Me too.
okay. Is there anything else in the Q&A? Nope.
Just that April can also hear. So,
Okay,
yeah, and Liz. So I'm wondering if it's on Jen's end.
okay, all right. I will just continue. Sorry, Jen. So Dale works for the New York City Watershed Ag Program and helps to protect the unfiltered drinking water source for the 9 million water consumers in New York City. Dale has over 35 years experience as a field crops educator with a focus on production of quality forages.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you,
Janice.
Dale.
Yeah, so we'll dive right in here, I guess. And thanks to the team that put these things together. All the other workshops we've had these previous weeks have been great. And I hope to live up to the standard of quality that everybody's had before me. So just thinking about forages, well, there we go. Here's where I want to be, this slide. So basically, one of the things that I started to think about is, yeah, can we get some respect for forages? We have more acres of forages than anything else by far in our state. You know, our biggest industries are dairy and livestock farming, and you know, the majority of the diets for those animals are forages. Our forages protect our soil quality, prevent erosion, sequester carbon, do all kinds of great environmental services. They're perennial. You know, there's a lot of things to love about forage. And so I'm glad we're able to talk about it today. And, you know, what do we want? When it comes to forage, we want yield and we want quality. And yield's easy to understand, right? We want more, right? We want as much as we can get. But what's quality? Quality is a little more elusive. And quality means different things to different species and different classes of animals. And so when we talk about quality, we really need to know, what do we want to use this for? But we also know it matters a lot. If we have the wrong quality for the wrong group of animals, we're not going to get the performance we want. And so in this sort of idea of yield and quality, you know, Jerry Cherney, our forage specialist on campus, says often, quality times yield equals yield. You know, in economic analysis, yield usually overwhelms quality in you know, the dollars and cents analysis. And so we can't ignore yield by any stretch. But then, you know, we have this yield and quality sort of tension always when we're talking about forage crops. And so that's going to be a theme as we go through these slides. And, you know, if we're going to talk about what it's worth, you know, quality is really you know, really is about what is a forage worth. And if we're going to do some economic analysis, we need to know what this stuff we're producing is worth. But it's not like corn or soybeans or wheat, right, where there's a market price and it's well defined. Market prices are hard to find. There are some USDA market reports out there. There's some auction reports, but there's really no standard way of valuing forages. Part of that is because, is it a small square bale or a big square bale or a round bale of baleage or a silo full of something? All of those things are more or less saleable depending on who you're selling to. So valuing forages from a dollars and cents point is hard. Buying forages is difficult. Who has the quality that you need? Who has the amount of the quality that you need? And how do you find it? So even just the act of trying to buy forage is costly. So really the bottom line is the forage you make has a lot of value, because replacing it is really hard. You need to have enough. It's not easy to put a value on it, but it's probably worth more than you think. And it's probably worth more than just what the market price is. And so let's talk a little bit also about high forage diets. High forage diets have been the trend for our dairy diets, recently, for good reasons. High forage diets, 60% forage or more is one of the ways that we define a high forage diet in our precision feed management program. Healthier cows, a lower ration cost, better components, usually higher profits. Also, if we're feeding more on-farm forage, we're importing less feeds from off the farm, fewer concentrates that are high cost, but also it's good for the mass balance on our farm from a nutrient balance kind of idea. So we have some challenges though, right? Because if you want a high forage diet and you want high performance, you got to have high digestibility, right? And if you have high digestibility forages, you have faster passage rates, you have lower NDF, so you can pack more of that in the rumen at any one time. And so you have higher dry matter intakes, or intakes, I guess, if you read my slide. So, if it's higher quality and they eat more of it, then you need more inventory, right? So, it's just a thing that spirals, that we improve quality, they eat more of it. So not only we need more of it, right? It's sort of compounding. And so it's this interaction of yield and quality that's really important in planning this forage production on our farm. So thinking about quality, here's this graph. We've been doing scissors cut sampling in Delaware County. At least I have good data going back to 2008. We did a few years before that on a limited number of fields. But looking at 2008 through 2022, just tracking, and often we do 35 to 45 fields per year that we track through the month of May, trying to predict the right first cutting day. So if you look at NDF and NDF digestibility, which is two of the things that we measure in our scissors cuts, you can see that over the course of May into early June, NDF goes up steadily. Now not quite a point a day, but lots of times we talk about 1 point in NDF per day is not unusual to see in May. And then the digestibility of that NDF continually goes down. And so from a quality standpoint, there's more NDF. and that NDF is lower in digestibility. So the energy that the animal's going to get from that, sort of going down in two different ways. And this is just a chart of grass forages. And so 50 NDF is kind of our cutoff for where we would like to see the start of grass harvest. So again, it's not, because of the weather each spring varies. When we get there is a little bit different each spring, but on the average, it's about May 16th in Delaware County that we get to 50 NDF. If our tolerance for quality is somewhere, in the high 50s, sort of, we'd like to get our whole first cutting crop in that between 50 to 56, 57, maybe. So that really defines, what this really defines is our harvest window, right? So if that's the quality that we require, our harvest window is that 7 or 10 days, the third week of June, right? Or excuse me, third week of May. If there's some legume, or if, legume fields are often out here, getting to optimum around the 1st of June, for us. So we're talking about harvesting grasses, a week before, high percentage legume stands. We find that something that's 50% or less alfalfa grass, 50% lower percentage alfalfa, often, those fields are prime kind of in this same window as our grass fields are. Maybe a few days later, but not too much later. So again, we've got this sort of, obviously, yields going up every one of these days also, right? As the hay matures, there's more yield. So again, talking about yield and quality, we've spent, these last, couple decades really worrying about dairy quality forage. Well, what if you're a livestock producer? You have beef cows, you want to feed beef cows. If you've got steers that you're trying to get to have a high number of pounds of gains per day, you probably need something that's very similar to this dairy quality forage. But if you're overwintering brood cows, you want something that's very different. You're looking for something is closer to this high 60s NDF kind of stuff. And so you're probably looking to wait out until the first week of June or the second week of June to make that first cutting. So again, the animals you're feeding really matter. So just thinking again about harvest window, let's just say you have 100 acres of grass hay you need to harvest. Not every day is harvestable. It rains, and in May in Delaware County, it rains a lot, and at least 3 days a week, it's usually rainy. If we're lucky, we get that many sunny days. And so if we say, sort of something just before 50 to about 55 is our target, when you do the math, you've got to do about 25 acres per day to hit that harvest window. Again, this is kind of calculation we like to do with folks and just say, if you've got these acres and you know what your harvest window is, you need to think about removing the bottlenecks that'll get you to that number of acres per day. So if you're a large farm and you got, 1,000 acres of grass hay you need to do, that means you have to do 250 acres a day. So it's not hard to see why we see some of the large equipment that, that's around. It's really a race when we get to that early first cutting window, and it matters. I think it's the most significant event on a dairy farm all year long is that first cutting window. So again, we're talking about the foundations of success. So we can't talk about the foundations of success without worrying about soil pH. pH has a lot to do with nutrient availability, phosphorus use efficiency, and low pH, you've got a lot of aluminum, manganese, and iron, which end up being toxic to plants and plant roots. Nodulation of legumes really doesn't happen well unless we're above 6.5. So pH really matters. Again, here's sort of our, you can see the solubility of nutrients here. And we have an awful lot of soils in Delaware County that are in this, 5 to 6 kind of pH range. And you can see a lot of the important nutrients that we care about in our forages are lower availability at low pH. And I think this is really where it's even more important. This manganese, aluminum, boron are toxic in this, below 5.7, and so we just get a lot less root growth. And the more we're talking about soil health and microbial activity, these low pHs don't lend themselves to that high level of microbial activity that we'd like to keep our nutrient cycles powered up and going. So again, this is just some textbook pictures of what do roots look like under different pHs. And you can see that at low pHs, root growth is really hindered. And I think that's the foundation or the reason why we really need to be looking at that pH. Again, what are pH requirements we want for alfalfa? We want that 6.5, 6.8 kind of pH. For our clovers and grasses, 6.2 will do the job, but you really need to be over 5.7, get to that 5.9, 6.2 kind of range. And that's really where this sort of aluminum toxicity kind of thing starts to turn off and our plants can thrive. So we had a project where we did a bunch of liming on some of our farms in the New York City watershed, and colleague of ours on the nutrient management team here, Carrie Sheridan, put these slides together. So we looked at 43 fields where we had soil samples before the liming. Of course, we had the soil sample, so we knew how much lime to put on. And then we had a soil sample again a couple of years later after the liming had happened to see what the results were. So on the average, those fields were 5.6 before we did the liming. And generally, we put on the 3 tons of ENV equivalent, 100% ENV equivalent. And that got us to a pH of 6.4. So right where we wanted to be. So that's 3/4 of a point. Remember, pH is a logarithmic scale. So 1 whole point is 100 times more acid or 100 times more basic, right? Manganese, one of these sort of not healthy for roots nutrients, decreased by 20%. Aluminum decreased by 13%. So again, all those going in the right direction, we should expect greater root growth, enhanced nutrient uptake, healthier plants. Magnesium increased by 21%, which is not surprising because essentially all lime contains some amount of magnesium. And then soil phosphorus. Again, lime doesn't have any phosphorus in it, but when we saw an increase in phosphorus soil test because of the liming. Again, remember, especially with our Morgan extraction that we use for Cornell recommends, it's a fairly weak acid. So as that phosphorus becomes more available because the pH is higher, we should see the soil test come up a little bit because there's more extractable P with the Morgan extraction. But especially in the watershed, isn't increased soil phosphorus a bad thing? And, often we would say yes. Phosphorus is our enemy when it comes to eutrophication and a lot of water quality problems. But I think what's really important to remember is we're doing more than just that. So we've got improved pH is creating healthier root systems, which explore more soil. Those roots access more water and nutrients. We get more yield. We got a larger pool of nutrients that are actively cycling. Phosphorus removal per acre goes up because yield goes up, because the access to phosphorus goes up. So that's really mitigating water quality problems. So the total P in the soil really didn't change with liming, but the availability of that phosphorus improves. And so our plants actually can take it up, and we're actually removing that and having a large active pool cycling phosphorus, which gives us control of that phosphorus. So again, just on liming, remember, know the ENV of the lime you're buying. We've run into some challenges of folks selling lime here that really is substandard. Make sure you get a lime tag and know what the ENV is. Use a current soil test so you know what your rate is. Other good thing about lime, there's really no bad time to apply lime. If you can get on the field and not run over the crop, it's a fine time to put on lime. So let's get into more of what we really wanted to talk about today. Let's talk about alfalfa and high percentage alfalfa grass nutrient requirements. Remember, the alfalfa is going to be fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere. It does it all by itself. We really don't need to supply any nitrogen. Phosphorus is really important for establishment and for general plant production, but we're going to see that especially at establishment, phosphorus matters. Potassium really helps with plant health and winter hardiness. It's probably the key nutrient when we talk about fertilizing alfalfa. We often have questions about boron and sulfur with alfalfa. Again, these are, they're not quite micronutrients, but they're minor nutrients. Boron can at times be a problem, especially acid, low pH, sandy soils with not much manure history. In those situations, you should pay attention, and maybe a little bit of, a pound or two per acre in your top dress fertilizer wouldn't be wrong. You can also soil test for boron and know if you have an adequate amount. Sulfur, again, as our air quality is improving, the free sulfur from the atmosphere and acid rain is less. So again, acid, low organic matter, sandy soils with not much manure history, sulfur might be a need. But if you've got a manure history like most alfalfa fields do, I think, at least on livestock farms, maybe is not a huge problem. So let's look at the fertilizer chart for alfalfa establishment. And I've highlighted the soil group 3 in all of these. I think most of the soils that are growing forages in the state are probably in that group 3. If you've got, sandier soils, they would be, more towards the group 4 or 5. If you've got soils with a high clay content, they're going to be down in the group 1s and 2s kind of area. And so really, these charts, the only place where you see any difference is over in the potassium, just because of the supplying power of those clay minerals for potassium. So again, we talked about phosphorus being important. You can see that if you've got, medium or low phosphorus, that's a pretty significant amount of P recommended there. And generally that's looking at phosphorus being supplied in a band. And if you're planting with a drill, you may well be able to band that phosphorus, and there's certainly an advantage to banding. If you can't band, often I see recommendations of tripling the phosphorus if you are broadcasting versus banding. And so again, you're in those lower, those lower phosphorus sort of soil test areas. That's you triple, 60 to 180 pounds of phosphorus. That's a significant amount to get on. Manure can be helpful. The phosphorus and potassium in manure is available in the seeding year. And so, a limited rate might make sense. But again, remember, it doesn't need that nitrogen, and you might be, causing some other challenges, maybe with over fertilizing a companion crop, or encouraging some weeds with a higher nitrogen in the with manure. But also remember, most alfalfa's in a rotation with corn. And so we're often using high manure rates on corn. And this alfalfa part of the rotation really helps mine some of that phosphorus and potassium that we built up over the corn fertilization years. And if any of you are in the CAFO world and worrying about phosphorus index, it really helps to keep your phosphorus soil test down in the low part of the high range, to make manure management that's allowed with a P index easier. So these alfalfa parts of the rotation are really helpful in mining some of that P and K out. Again, looking at top dressing, again, this is for those 50% or better alfalfa fields. Phosphorus becomes less important in the top dress, although, a small amount is often recommended. But if you're in a medium and low kind of area of potash, fields that don't have a long manure history or might be in that area, doing the phosphorus or potash top dress is really important. And so that's the kind of fertilizing that we usually think about with alfalfa fields is, some kind of summer top dress of P and K. Again, watch your soil tests, know what you need. I think the soil test recommendations are pretty trustworthy. If you are out there in the high and very high range, you definitely don't need to top dress these fields. And again, if you're there, it's because you put a lot of manure in there, and it really would be beneficial for you to mine that down to a lower level, and preserve some flexibility for manure spreading in the future. Okay, so alfalfa and manure. First thing, the nitrogen from manure turns off nitrogen fixation from the plants. And so there's really no economic value of putting manure on alfalfa. If your P and K is medium or low, you could use some manure to provide that rather than a fertilizer top dress. But again, if the P and K is high or very high, there's additionally no economic value. Sort of these micronutrients and boron and sulfur, manure is a good source of those, and manure has some value. Again, if you're in that situation of needing it, it probably means you don't have much manure history either. So what if you need more places to spread manure? You know, there are sort of nutrient management rules that will let you spread some manure, but still there's no fertilizer economic value there. It simply would be disposing of manure in a place where you're allowed to put it, probably continuing to escalate the phosphorus and potassium levels in your soils. So there's probably a better place for manure than on alfalfa or alfalfa grass fields. So what if we've got lower percentage legume fields, sort of these 25 to 50% legume, maybe older stands? Again, a little bit of nitrogen is needed for that grass, so 30 to 50 pounds. You know, some P and K definitely helps a legume in that. And so a little bit of manure probably wouldn't be bad. And, you know, again, a more balanced fertilizer would be probably the way to go in a medium soil test. And generally, once we get to 25% or less from a fertility kind of standpoint on a hayfield, we would ignore any legume there. Sort of the nitrogen fixation is low enough that it's really not giving us a significant benefit to the grass in the stand. So let's talk about fertilizing grasses. This is getting into my passion, I guess. You know, in our part of the world, grass hay fields are the predominant number of acres that are out there. And there's significant opportunity to make some really great quality forage from these fields if we put the management package together. So especially with intense management, we have high nitrogen needs for these grass fields. We don't have the alfalfa there to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. We have to supply it from somewhere else. Again, phosphorus is important for establishment, as in any of the plants we're establishing. Potassium is also important. One of the things we have seen in some what I call neglected hay fields where somebody's been mowing the hay for a number of years and not putting anything back. We often see more grass diseases there. And when we put some potash on, and those grasses are definitely more disease, you know, express their disease resistance much better. And are, you know, so low, we need to supply that potash from somewhere if we're going to have a productive hay field. Just one note of caution: if you're looking to have dry cow forage that's low in potash, you actually need that field to be deficient. And putting some nitrogen on a deficient soil potash field is probably the way to get, if you're looking for low potash forage. Put some nitrogen on, but definitely stay away with manure, stay away with potash fertilizer. Again, sort of the sulfur question is a good one. If it's a field that has not much manure history, might be a little acid, might be a little sandy, low organic matter. Most of our sod fields are not low organic matter, but those are the places where sulfur might help. And maybe blending some ammonium sulfate in that nitrogen top dress would be a way to, is an easy way to get some sulfur on these fields if you're concerned. So the other thing that's super important here is that harvest management and fertility decisions are closely linked. We're struggling on this yield and quality thing, right? And so you really can't think of them separately, yield and or fertility and harvest management. So again, establishing grasses, it looks a lot like the establishing legume. We're trying to get seeds to germinate, and having enough phosphorus in that environment's important. And we need probably a little bit of potash to go along with it. Banding still is the most efficient way. And again, manure can be a good source here. So top dressing grass. Here's one of those places where our harvest management matters. If you've got a 1 or a 2 cut system, you might be able to get away with only 50 or 75 pounds of manure of nitrogen for the season. And you probably can supply that all in the first cutting and you'd probably be all right. If you're looking at an intensive grass management system, especially where you're going to be cutting early, that at green up nitrogen's super important. And we'll talk more about the recommendations, but you can easily get up to 150 or 200 pounds of applied nitrogen per acre on these fields. And again, don't forget P and K. If these are fields that are infrequently manured, pay attention to your soil tests. Adding that P and K does matter. Again, could be a summer top dress kind of time frame to keep you in good shape there on the P and K, or you could blend it together with your at green up, nitrogen. So again, let's think about manure on grasses. We already said you got a high nitrogen requirement. It's a good target for manure. And if you're manuring these grass hay fields, you probably are still going to need some nitrogen beyond what your manure is supplying. To get 150 or 200 pounds of available nitrogen from manure would require rates that you probably wouldn't want to apply. And your P and K rates would be way more than what you'd want to do. Again, if you got a phosphorus and potassium that's medium or low, manure is valuable there and has value up to the P and K needs. Again, if P and K are high and you don't need to apply more, there's no economic value for manure, at least from the P and K kind of standpoint. Same answer here for sulfur. If you got a field that's being manured at least once every few years, I don't think you're going to have an issue with sulfur. So you need more places to spread. This is the place. Grasses can really use a lot of nitrogen. You've got the sod that's protecting you and helping with reducing runoff and risk of runoff. So these grass hay fields are a great place to soak up manure. Again, the only caution is if your P and K can rise to excess if you're trying to get a lot of nitrogen from your manure, and in those event that you're looking for a dry cow forage, probably not the right place for manure. Okay, so here's a slide I like to show. This is from a plot we did a number of years ago here in Delaware County. We've done it several times, and the results are pretty much always the same. We applied different rates, no nitrogen, sort of the Cornell recommends rate, half a rate below Cornell recommends, and 1.5 the Cornell recommends rate. So again, for intensive management, excuse me, 100 pounds at green up, and then 50 after each cutting, or for each additional cutting. We did 4 cuttings here. We did at green up, after first, after second. We didn't apply any more after third. You can see where we used the recommended rate. We doubled the 0 nitrogen yield, which is pretty typical. You want to do a plot where you can get visible, dramatic results for adding fertilizer. Do a nitrogen response on a grass hay field. It works every time. Can see going to a 1.5 rate didn't give us any more yield, and the half rate didn't perform that badly. And again, if we had some manure on a field, this probably would be not a bad treatment if we had manure coming from other sources as well. So the real question the last couple of years has been, as urea prices have gone through the roof, can I still afford to put urea on if it's $800 a ton or $1,000 a ton? So I updated our analysis here. I put in hay values at $225 to $300 a ton. Remember, we're doing this cutting management to make premium quality stuff, at least something that's good or very good. These are going to be 14 or 15% protein and in mid-50s NDF. Just sort of the prime for forage that we're looking for. So it's got a good value, and I got one quote or heard from one farmer saying urea is going to be around $750 a ton this spring. We'll see, how it turns out or what it is in your neighborhood. But still, we had a like $600 return, after $600 benefit per acre, even after we took out for that high priced urea. Even if you're getting closer to $1,000 a ton, you're still getting a really good $1 return from this nitrogen. So it's definitely, the economics are there, to put on the fertility if you're doing the cutting management that's going to get you the quality that's got the value. Again, if you want a little bit of phosphorus, or excuse me, a little bit of sulfur, put some ammonium sulfate, blend 50-50 or 60-40, 75-25 ammonium sulfate or urea to ammonium sulfate, and you can get, depending on your rate, look for that 20 pounds or so of sulfur per acre. That's a good way to go. And also don't forget about P and K. A lot of times these fields, many of these grass hay fields on a livestock farm are getting some manure, so the P and K may well be there. But we'll look at another set of results here in a minute where the P and K really mattered.
Dale?
Yes.
We have a question about sulfur while you're on the topic.
Sure.
Anna asks, have you seen any evidence of a relationship between sulfur fertility and protein content of grass?
I think we haven't looked there. We really haven't had a place where doing a sulfur comparison, fit for us. But sulfur is definitely a component of protein. I wouldn't be surprised that supplying sulfur, if it's deficient, could improve protein. But I would also say most of the time protein is, we almost always have more protein than we need in our rations, especially high forage rations. Our problem is often getting the protein, not having excess protein, and trying to stay, control our, milk urea, blood urea, nitrogen levels. So getting more protein is usually not what we're after. We're looking for more digestible fiber. That's really where it matters, I think. So let's talk about this cutting management and fertility thing a little bit. One of our plots, we had the opportunity, the farmer where we had our plot, they had not, by the time we got to second cutting in our plot, they had not done first cutting in the surrounding field. So we were able to do, to sample and see what the yield was in that late cut first cutting. So, late or early July, right? So we had 2 cuttings in our plot and only 1 cutting in the surrounding field. So with no nitrogen, delaying cutting got us more in 1 cut than we got in 2 cuts without nitrogen. Because one of the things I would say is you don't want to, if you're putting the investment in nitrogen at green up on these fields, you need to harvest it at the right time to get the value. So again, low yields, but then compared with, again, we didn't get quite as much in the first cut of our fertilized plot as we did if we had waited another 40 days or so to cut the hay. But added together, we were, well more in 2 cuttings. So again, it's just this harvest management and fertility go together. If I were going to be harvesting in July, I might not want to put very much nitrogen on. I'm sure if we had put nitrogen here and waited, we'd had even more yield and we'd had very low quality. But if high fiber or low digestibility stuff is what you need for overwintering beef cows, that might not be a bad practice.
Dale.
Yes.
We had a question about nitrogen timing way back at the beginning of the webinar today.
I have some slides on nitrogen timing.
Okay, got it.
In just a minute, so we'll get there.
Yep.
Actually, the very next slide. So here we are, putting nitrogen on at green up. So when we say at green up, as soon as those fields start to have a little bit of growth, I would say in Delaware County, we are not at green up yet. Although some years we would be at this date, right? We fertilized plots as early as the, 27th, 28th of May, and we had, they're starting to wake up. Not this year yet here. In 2019, we had this question of how early can we go and how late can we go and still get a response? So we went out essentially weekly on some plots and put out our first cutting nitrogen. So between 75 and 100 pounds N at green up. So we started April 11th. That was green up that year. And we got the best response going as close to green up as you can. So again, I had my, I'm sure we used ammonium sulfate here because that's the easiest thing to hand apply. And, with my bucket, I didn't make any muddy tracks, right? So going early, that's the big challenge is, can you get across the field? How early can you get across the field? So again, if you can hit that as early at green up as you can, there's an advantage to being there, right at green up. But even going as late as May 2nd. Again, remember, we probably harvested this on May 16th or 17th, right? We tried to hit it right at our scissors cut predicted 50% NDF. So even with that nitrogen only being out there for 2 weeks before we harvested, we still got a pretty good yield bump from that nitrogen. I can also say that when we went back and did second cutting, you could see the carryover effects of nitrogen in this plot, where in this one you couldn't, right? When it was there the whole time, the plants were able to use everything we put there. When we went later, we had some carryover effect into second, so it wasn't wasted, in that sense. So I would say, how late can you go? I think you can put your, sort of at green up nitrogen on as late as the first week of May, and it's still worth it. You'll probably still see the wheel tracks from your application in the hay, because it's pretty tall, you're running over it, but it's still worthwhile. And you'll get the yield and quality benefits from doing that. Again, so as early as you can, but if circumstances prevent you from getting out there, in April, even as late as the first week of May, I think it can be okay. Does that fit I don't know who had the question, does that fit what you're looking for an answer?
Actually, the question was even an extension of this. It was about fall application of grass and the impact on the spring grass first cut production.
I can believe that happens, right? I mean, if you're making the grass happy in the fall, it's probably happy in the spring. Economically, I would question whether it really is a benefit. And certainly you're putting nitrogen out there in a time when you're going to have probably a fair amount of loss. Your leaching losses would likely be, so environmentally, it's definitely a bad practice. We put manure on fields fall and winter, but I would say, especially with the cost of nitrogen fertilizer, I don't think it's probably a smart move.
So, and Dale, I have another way to think about this too. If it's compared to not putting any nitrogen on at all, then it probably does appear positive. But if it's compared with putting it on according to your information here, then it probably wouldn't be as positive.
I think that's a fair way to say it. Yep.
We have a related question here too from Brian. What is the risk of applying N before green up? It's related to this fall application almost. Soils aren't warm yet. Why not just go just before green up when soils might still be somewhat frozen in the morning, thawing in the afternoon?
I think that could work. I think you want to be careful. Some of these, where this is bouncing around here, there were a couple of these days that we actually had snow on the ground when I went and did the fertilizing. And when I fertilized on a day that was really cold, even if it was, in the middle of April, we didn't get as good a response as if it was on a day when things were growing well. Again, I don't know what the mechanism is there, but I think some of those days that it's freezing, I wouldn't be surprised. We've got 50-ish degrees today. If we went out this weekend, we'd probably see some grass greening up. It's probably getting to about, good time to go. So I think there's less risk there. I do think that especially in the view of high nitrogen prices with urea, using a urease inhibitor, probably is a good insurance. Again, the soils are cooler, the soil's moist, the risk of volatilization is a lot lower. But I think that, just considering the total cost of urea now, going with the protector is probably a good idea. I'll move
Bill,
on
I
to
wanted to ask you if
one more
you
question. Yeah.
did
Go
you
ahead.
use urease protected urea for the study that you're showing us?
Well, in all my studies, I almost always use ammonium sulfate,
Oh,
just
gotcha.
because we do small plots and it's hand applied. And so in a small plot, we might be putting on, like 12 ounces, like a 12-ounce cup of fertilizer. That's ammonium sulfate. If it's urea, which is twice as dense, nitrogen wise, 46 versus 21, right? I would only have 6 ounces of stuff to spread around the plot. So it's a lot easier to do it with ammonium sulfate. So that's what we usually use in our hand fertilized plots. So this is just one last slide here. Talk about these depleted hay fields. We have a lot more of these around these days. Some of them are on our beef farms or folks that are sort of have transitioned from dairy and are doing some hay sales. So these grass hay fields where they're not being manured anymore, and they haven't been fertilized, and they've just been mined of nutrients by continually taking hay off and not putting anything back for 10 years or more. So in one of these depleted hay fields is a demonstration that Paul did here in Delaware County a year or two ago. At Green Up, we put on a total of 84, 28, 63. So basically we get our 75 to 100 pounds of nitrogen plus the P and K that soil tests asked for. So we put that on at Green Up, and then after first cutting, we put on an additional 50 pounds of nitrogen, which is our normal recommendation. So again, you can see that even if we just fertilize the first cutting, we got a significant response. The other thing that we saw there is not just a yield response, but sort of we started to see, even in that first year, a transition to a higher percentage of the desirable grass and a lower percentage of the broadleaf weeds that we don't want or that are not as productive. So we're getting more yield and we're increasing the density of our desirable species, which should be helping us even more in future years. Even using 2022 fertilizer prices, we had about $100 per acre benefit from what was really a fairly high cost fertilizer program for this field. you know, we still had $100 more value after we took the fertilizer cost out. So this is definitely something, you know, we're seeing more on some of our livestock farms and folks that are, you know, looking at, you know, making hay here for the hay market. You know, don't forget about the P and K. It definitely, because we've had manure on almost every field for so long, we forget about, you know, that P and K's got to come from somewhere. So I think I've used all my time. Although we did cover a couple questions, be happy to do a few more.